The headlights cut through the thick fog. A black sedan sat perfectly still. It rested on the highway's narrow shoulder. The engine was still humming softly. The driver's door swung wide open. Cold wind whistled through the cabin. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the seat. Hot coffee spilled onto the floor. The radio played a low, static hiss. No one sat behind the wheel. The keys remained in the ignition. The blinker clicked rhythmically in the dark. A cell phone lay on the dashboard. 10 missed calls flashed on screen. The last message was never finished. I think someone is following me. The highway was deserted for miles. Tall pines crowded the asphalt edges. Rain began to smear the windshield. The wiper swiped across dry glass. There were no signs of struggle. The leather seats showed no damage. Everything looked normal, yet hauntingly wrong. A gold watch sat in the tray. Footprints led away from the door. They stopped abruptly in the mud. The tracks simply vanished into nothing. No dragging marks were ever found. A heavy silence swallowed the scene. The car's clock ticked toward midnight. The headlights finally began to dim. The battery was slowly dying out. The trunk was locked tight. Inside, a suitcase remained neatly packed. Clothes for a trip were inside. A map was circled in red. Who leaves a running car behind? The road offered no immediate answers. Somewhere in the woods, a branch snapped. The empty car waited for someone. Shadows stretched across the wet pavement. A police cruiser slowed down nearby. The officer stepped out into cold. His flashlight cut through the mist. He peered into the dark interior. "Is anyone there?" he shouted loudly. Only the wind replied to him. The sedan looked like a shell. He checked the vehicle's registration plate. The name belonged to Elias Thorne, a man with no known enemies. He had vanished without a trace. The officer felt a sudden chill. He reached for his heavy radio. "I found the vehicle," he said, "but the driver is gone." Nearby, the forest seemed to watch. The trees leaned toward the road. Deep inside the thick, dark brush, something metallic glinted in the light. It was a small silver key. It did not fit the car. It lay deep in the dirt, waiting to be found by someone. The investigation began at first light. Detectives combed the grassy highway banks. They found a single leather glove. It was soaked through with rain. K-9 units sniffed the car's interior. The dogs whined and backed away. They refused to follow the scent. Fear clouded their dark, wet eyes. The highway camera showed the car. It was driving normally at 10. Then it pulled over very sharply. The footage cut to black static. Technology had failed the police team. The mystery grew deeper with time. Friends spoke of his strange behavior. He claimed the road was haunted. He hated driving at night, they said. He feared the empty road stretches. Yet he chose this path anyway. No one understood why he left. A month passed without any news. The car sat in a lot. It remained a cold steel monument. A riddle that no one solved. People avoid that stretch of highway. They say the engine still echoes. Sometimes a ghost car appears there, waiting for a passenger to return. The asphalt holds its secrets tight. The woods never give up souls. The car found empty remains famous. A story of a sudden disappearance. The coffee is dry now. The battery is completely dead. The engine will never hum again. The highway stays silent and Detective Miller arrived at the scene. The morning sun offered no comfort. The black sedan looked like a tomb. Yellow tape cordoned off the highway. Miller put on his blue gloves. He leaned into the driver's side. The smell of ozone filled the air. It smelled like a lightning strike. He looked under the front seat. He found a small leather diary. The pages were damp and yellowed. The last entry was dated today. The shadows are getting longer now. The radio is speaking my name. I cannot stop the car anymore. The handwriting was shaky and frantic. Miller frowned at the strange words. Elias Thorne was a logical man. He was a high-ranking physics professor. Why was he writing about ghosts? A technician called Miller over quickly. They had found a hidden camera. It was mounted on a nearby tree. It pointed directly at the car. The footage was grainy and dark. It showed Elias stopping the car. He stepped out with his hands up. He looked like he was surrendering. but there was no one else. The road was completely, utterly empty. Elias walked toward the dark woods. Then the camera lens suddenly cracked. "Look at his shadow," Miller whispered. The shadow was moving independently now. It did not follow Elias's feet. It dragged him toward the trees. The team searched the forest floor. They found a circle of salt. It was hidden under the leaves. In the center sat a watch. It was not Elias's gold watch. This one was old and rusted. The hands were frozen at midnight. The back had a strange symbol. "This is an old ritual site." The forensics expert looked very pale. People vanished here 50 years ago. The highway was built over graves. Miller felt a cold wind blow. The trees seemed to be shivering. He heard a faint, clicking sound. It matched the car's blinker noise. He looked back at the sedan. The blinker was flashing again now, but the battery was definitely dead. The light was a ghostly green. "Check the trunk again," Miller ordered. The officers pried the metal open. The suitcase was now completely empty. The clothes had turned into ash. A scream echoed from the woods. The canine units began to howl. The lead dog broke its leash. It vanished into the thick brush. The officers drew their heavy weapons. They stared into the deep green. Nothing moved in the silent forest. The air felt heavy and thick. Miller found a scrap of cloth. It was from Elias's blue jacket. It was snagged on a thorn. Beyond it lay a deep hole. The hole was perfectly mathematically round. It went down into total darkness. No bottom could be seen clearly. The edges were scorched and burnt. "He didn't walk away," Miller said. "He was pulled into the earth." The ground beneath them felt soft. The highway began to vibrate slowly. A low hum filled their ears. The same sound as the engine. The black sedan shifted on its. The doors locked with a snap. "Get back from the car now," Miller yelled to his startled team. The windows turned opaque and black. The vehicle started to glow bright. The metal began to groan loudly. It was folding in on itself. The sedan was shrinking very fast. Space seemed to warp around it. Then there was a loud pop. The car was gone entirely now. Only a scorched mark remained there. The highway was empty once more. The scorched earth began to smoke. Miller knelt by the black mark. The asphalt had melted like wax. The air tasted like burnt copper. His radio suddenly erupted with noise. Voices screamed through the heavy static. They sounded like they were underwater. "Help us," a faint voice cried. Miller recognized the voice very well. It was Elias Thorne's frantic tone. But Elias was gone into air. The signal was coming from underground. The technician checked the signal source. "The frequency is impossible," he said. "It is coming from miles deep. There are no tunnels down there." The sky turned a bruised purple. The sun disappeared behind thick clouds. Birds fell silent in the trees. The entire forest held its breath. Miller looked at the round hole. He dropped a flare into it. The red light fell for minutes. It never hit a solid bottom. Suddenly, the ground began to ripple. The highway looked like moving water. The yellow lines twisted like snakes. The officers scrambled for higher ground. A shadow emerged from the hole. It had no face or body. It was a tear in reality. It drifted toward the frightened men. "Do not move," Miller shouted loudly. The shadow stopped near the detective. It pulsed with a cold light. A hand reached out from within. It was a human hand, pale. It wore a gold wedding ring, the same ring Elias always wore. Miller reached out to grab it. The moment their skin finally touched, the world around them vanished instantly. Miller was no longer on highway. He stood in a vast hallway. The walls were made of glass. Outside, stars drifted in the dark. Thousands of empty cars floated there. They were all abandoned on roads. "Welcome to the great collection," a voice echoed in his mind. Elias stood at the far end. He looked thin and very tired. "Why are we here?" Miller asked. Elias pointed to the floating cars. "The highway is a giant trap. It feeds on the lonely travelers. The road was not built by men. It was a living, breathing entity. It took what it needed most. It took the souls of drivers. Every empty car found on roads Every driver who simply vanished away, they were all here in space, trapped in this silent glass prison. We have to leave now, Miller. He grabbed Elias by the arm. The glass walls began to crack. The stars outside turned bright red. The entity was waking up now. It felt the presence of intruders. The hallway began to stretch long. The exit was moving far away. You cannot leave the great road. The voice was like grinding stone. Once you stop, you stay forever. The floor turned into soft black. Shadows rose from the glass floor. They looked like faceless highway patrol. They moved with a jerky motion. Their eyes were cold, white lights. Miller drew his service pistol out. He fired at the closest shadow. The bullets passed through the smoke. The shadows did not even flinch. Run toward the light, Elias cried. A small portal flickered ahead of them. It showed the rainy highway scene. The officers were still waiting there. They ran through the shifting hall. The gravity began to fail them. They floated toward the hungry stars. Miller kicked off a floating car. He lunged toward the glowing hole. He felt cold fingers on boots. The shadows were pulling them back. He kicked with all his strength. Miller felt the cold grip tighten. The shadows were strong and heavy. They pulled at his heavy boots. The portal was closing very fast. "Let go of me," Miller screamed. He kicked the faceless shadow hard. His foot connected with cold mist. He tumbled forward into the light. Elias followed right behind him now. They fell onto the hard asphalt. The transition was like a punch. The rain felt like sharp needles. The round hole snapped shut instantly. The scorched mark cooled to gray. The forest became deathly silent again. The officers rushed to help them. Miller gasped for the cold air. He looked at his shaking hands. They were stained with black soot. He looked over at Elias Thorne. The professor was staring at sky. His hair had turned snowy white. His eyes were wide and vacant. He did not recognize anyone there. "Where's the car?" Elias whispered. Miller looked at the empty shoulder. The black sedan was gone forever. Not a single bolt remained there. The police searched for weeks after. They found no tunnels or caves. The geological scans showed solid rock. The world ignored Miller's strange report. They called it a shared hallucination. Stress and fog had tricked them, but Miller knew the terrifying truth. He kept the rusted watch hidden. Elias was put in the hospital. He never spoke a word again. He only drew circles on walls, round black holes that never ended. Miller resigned from the police force. He could not drive at night. The sight of headlights scared him. He stayed home behind locked doors. 1 year later, he was traveling. He took a bus across state. The sun began to set low. The highway stretched out like ribbon. The bus passed a familiar spot. It was the same narrow shoulder. A new car sat there now. It was a bright red SUV. The driver's door was wide open. The engine was still humming softly. A child's toy lay on ground. No one was in the seats. Miller stood up on the bus. "Stop the bus," he shouted loudly. The driver ignored his frantic cry. The bus sped past the scene. He looked out the back window. He saw a shadow rising up. It looked like a faceless man. It was wearing a police uniform. The shadow looked exactly like Miller. It raised a hand in greeting. Then it faded into the trees. The red car was gone too. The highway always needs a driver. The road is never truly satisfied. It waits for the next traveler. It waits for the lonely engine. Miller sat back in his seat. He felt a cold, familiar chill. He looked down at his wrist. The rusted watch was ticking now. It was no longer stuck midnight. The hands were moving very fast. Time was catching up to him. The debt had to be paid. The bus lights began to flicker. The passengers turned into gray smoke. The driver vanished from his seat. The bus kept moving forward alone. Miller closed his eyes very tight. He heard the radio start hissing. "Welcome back," the voice whispered low. "We missed you on the road." The highway swallowed the bus whole. No wreckage was ever found there. Just another empty spot on road. Just another story for the locals. The road stays dark and hungry. Watch your fuel and your heart. Never stop on the lonely shoulder. The car found empty was you.